Brandon Kramer. Brandon is a DC-based filmmaker and co-founder of Meridian Hill Pictures. Brandon directed The First Step, City of Trees, and the Webby Award-winning documentary series, The Messy Truth. Please welcome our next speaker, Brandon Kramer. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. All right. Okay. Thank you to American University for having me and the entire team at Story Movements. My name is Brandon Kramer, and I'm a local documentary filmmaker, and I'm going to be talking about filmmaking and storytelling across political divisions, which is something that over the last 10 years I've dedicated my filmmaking career to because I feel it is an existential threat to our democracy, which is why I'm here to talk about it. Is this the clicker? Okay. So I don't think I think everyone here understands the social and political divisions in the country, but just to share two troubling research studies, 50% of adults in the US stopped talking to someone because they disagreed with them on a political or social issue, reported stopping talking to somebody because they disagreed with them. 84% of adults said that a fear of retaliation for speaking freely represents a very serious problem in the US. These underscore things that we already know. The country is deeply divided, and it's something that is a real threat. So starting about 10 years ago, I sort of started an exploration asking the question, can I tell stories about working across political and social divides in a way that can reach audiences across those same lines of difference? So both telling stories that confront these divisions, but also making sure that the results of the stories that we're creating can reach a very broad audience, which is very, very difficult to do. Why is that important? Politically, we live in a country with a divided government. All of the issues that I care about are very difficult to make any progress on if we cannot build coalitions, if we cannot compromise, if we cannot find ways to negotiate these differences. Socially, it's an existential threat to our democracy, our inability to have dialogue, to have debates, to be able to empathize and connect with one another. And narratively, as a filmmaker, I'm deeply concerned that we're living increasingly in a world where we're in echo chambers, where we're seeing narratives, we're seeing stories, we're getting information that affirm our beliefs, and we're losing a critical muscle, which is the ability to sit in uncomfortable ways with narratives, with opinions, with views that are not our own, that we don't agree with. How do we engage with those perspectives? How do we empathize and try to understand them? So this has been a pursuit of mine over the last 10 years. I'm going to be focusing most of this talk on my last film, which is called The First Step. It's a feature documentary that follows Van Jones and a coalition of criminal justice reform advocates and advocates working on the addiction crisis, conservatives and progressives. Over the course of about 3 years, we followed this very messy, very controversial effort to bring both grassroots leaders and political leaders together to pass what was a landmark criminal justice reform bill called the First Step Act, which has resulted in tens of thousands of people being released from federal prison. One of the central storylines of the film is Van brought together a group of community leaders from rural West Virginia, white conservative leaders who had all lost loved ones from the addiction crisis, and a group of advocates from South Los Angeles who also have been working on the addiction crisis there, who are Black and Latino, and all are working on the issue and have lost loved ones as well. He brings this group together to try to come up with shared solutions to the addiction crisis affecting the whole country in a bipartisan way. Hopefully it won't play yet. Okay, great. So I just want to talk about a few different principles that I've learned about how to document stories across lines of difference. So the first thing is Documenting connection. It seems obvious, but a lot of the times when we tell stories about bipartisanship, about coming together, we focus on disagreement, we focus on where it's contentious, and it's really, really important to build the kind of relationships and trust so that you can see these authentic moments of connection being formed. So here's a clip from my film, then I'll talk a little bit about it.
My mother was an alcoholic, and I guess my mother kind of created a pattern for me. And I don't know how I broke it. I don't know how I broke it, but I did. Now I'm raising daughters. One is a heroin addict. Oh, God, I've been through so much with her. Found her dead on my bathroom floor a couple months ago. And I guess God helped me bring her back. But I have a feeling she's using again. I'm just gonna keep going forward. And I hope she follows me, or I'll bury her. Thank you all. That was good. Thank you for listening.
So to get to a point where that conversation was filmed took almost 6 months of relationship building without a camera present. In a moment like today, people are very, very fearful of how they're going to be used, how their image is going to be used, in particular when they're in community and in relationship with people who are on the other side of the aisle. So when I initially went to West Virginia, they were like, we're not appearing in any, we're fine to meet with Los Angeles, we're fine to work with Van, we're not going to appear in any film that's going to show us in community in that way. Same thing happened in Los Angeles. People are very skeptical. And what I had to do was really explain to people that I want to authentically show these moments where you're connecting and also moments where you're disagreeing. I'm not trying to paint a very one-dimensional or simplified portrait of everyone's just kumbaya and coming together. And I'm also not trying to amp up the drama and conflict between you two. I'm really trying to authentically show and get at the nuances of what this relationship building process is. And after spending months and being really clear about my purpose, we got to a place where they would be willing to open up not just about their personal trauma and experiences, but also in community with one another. Next, I want to show a clip on the other end of the spectrum of documenting dissonance. So I think when we think about bipartisanship and working across the aisle, there's often a feeling like, okay, it's just going to be a bunch of people yelling at each other. And my experience is most people, when they're put in spaces together working across lines of difference, the conflict is much more subtle. It happens in really small ways. And so we filmed for days with this group together. And this is an example of a really small but really beautiful moment where this dissonance was present. And I'll play it and talk about it a little bit.
I would hope that no one would ever judge me by the way I voted, but more so on the person that I am. And, but I could see it both ways.
Shouldn't how we vote reflect our values? I think that we have values that align, but come into question when we vote differently. Things that folks where I come from have fought for decades to secure, he's undoing it now for us and attempting to dismantle the gains that we've made for my community. How do you respond to those folks? I think it's a matter of humanity.
Yeah, I don't have the answer.
So two things, a lot to say about this moment, but two things I want to point out in particular. One is, if you notice, we put a lot of attention on people's listening and reaction shots during a conversation like this, because it's not just the person speaking, it's the person listening to something very uncomfortable being shared with them. And they had the courage to be in a vehicle and having these kind of debates and discussions and openings. And I want audiences to sit through that kind of discomfort themselves. So you also see there's awkward pauses. If the scene goes on, it kind of has a lot of space, which is what I was in this car. It's what it felt like. And I want audiences to sort of flex that muscle, to have to go through that process themselves. And it's really important that these are conversations being filmed. It's not somebody in an interview telling me what bridge building looked like or what the experience was like. It's really about building the trust so you can see these kind of exchanges as they're unfolding. The last clip I want to play is, this is a scene. Van went to the conservative conference CPAC, which, how many people know what CPAC is? Okay, great. And when he was there, he basically said that Republicans are leading the fight on criminal justice reform, which was an extremely inflammatory thing to say. And the LA group that you see depicted in the film, after he made this comment, they decided they wanted nothing to do with Van, and they wanted nothing to do with the documentary as well. And so I had a conversation with them, and they basically told me that they're going to talk to Van and tell him we don't want to be a part of this organizing effort, anymore. And I asked them, well, if it's important to you, I asked them, why do you not want to participate in the documentary? And they said the reason is because we don't want to be affiliated with him. We don't want a movie coming out that shows our image with them. And I said, well, if that's important to you, then let me film the conversation that you're having with them so I can authentically represent the fact that you do not agree with him. And after weeks of conversation, they finally came around and said, okay, I filmed this really, really sacred conversation, really important conversation. And then I showed it to them before the film was released to make sure that it represented how they felt. So I'm going to play it and talk about it.
I think the thing that was disheartening for me, definitely the comments about y'all have done more on the right than my friends on the left have done. That was like a slap in the face. Deep disrespect, and then strategically, deep consequence.
And it's been some real warriors, some real soldiers fighting for this for the longest. They didn't get their due.
I think that the conversation that we're also lifting up here is erasure of histories and of struggles, and I think that our folks have experienced that for too long. It comes at a cost.
The idea that I'm gonna be judged based on one badly worded sentence. I thought it was people who didn't know me. To understand it's people who actually know my heart, who've seen my work. I was trying to make the point that there's a war inside that party between some of them that are trying to do a little bit more right and a bunch of them who want to keep doing wrong. I understand that what I said caused harm and maybe gave more harm than help.
But that's why we said, okay, let's have the conversation.
Do you feel like I'm not doing a good job listening?
Not at this moment.
So why is that so important to include in this film? It's important because there are a lot of people that feel that bridge building and engaging across the aisle, in particular, this is when Trump was president, can cause a lot of harm, and it can. And it's really important to me to represent those perspectives in the film, not just as antagonists, but as protagonists themselves. In my opinion, a film about bridge building isn't effective and doesn't actually reach audiences in the right way if you can't have people who believe in what Van is doing here represented in the film, and also people who really do not agree. And so this was critical for the release of the film. So we released the film in about 35 states. We did a theatrical release of the film, and we played in very progressive communities. We played in very conservative communities, and we played in very mixed communities. And the idea was we created panels that mirrored the kind of dialogue and discussions that are happening in the film, with local leaders having similar kind of discussions around criminal justice reform and the addiction crisis in those communities. And the idea was, how can we take the experience that they just had for 90 minutes watching this film? Hopefully, it disarmed people a little bit and gave people a little bit of opening and empathy into engaging across the aisle a bit more. And then how could we extend those kind of dialogues into those spaces? There was not a Republican version of this movie or a Democrat version. There's one film. And the hope is that audiences can empathize, can feel that there are protagonists depicted in this film that represent how they feel, but are also introduced to other perspectives that they might not agree with, and having to sort of sit with that experience. So we had this really amazing release of the film, and I'll conclude with just saying, these are some examples. We also screened in several different prisons across the country, which was a really amazing experience as well. I'll just conclude with, we're living in a very, very dark moment right now, and it's very hard to find hope. And I just want to share that, and I feel that darkness is overwhelmingly, but my experience working on this film left me with a few small slivers of hope. One of them is that I sat in these rooms in senators, congresspeople's offices, grassroots offices, where very real compromises were being worked out across these lines of differences. Those debates led to a piece of legislation, a document, many pages long, that was passed by the House, the Senate, signed by the former president, and has resulted in tens of thousands of people's freedom. And that is a very real thing. People's lives were saved as a result of compromise, and it's not just a hypothetical thing. Socially, this West Virginia LA group, they are friends. Those relationships have lasting power, and I saw firsthand how relationships really can be built across these lines of difference. Do we have the structures and the mechanisms and the incentives to make that happen? No, and we have a lot of work to do to get there. And narratively, through these screenings, I saw people open up to perspectives and dialogues that I don't think they would have as a result of seeing a film like this. So it left me with a lot of hope. I'll end by just saying CMSI graciously did this incredible, David Conrad, who I believe is here, and Katie, they came out to screenings all across the country to do a study on the impact that we were having. So in about a month, I believe, that study is going to be released. I encourage everybody to take a look at it and see what they were able to learn from our campaign. Thank you.